Chapter 11. When Israel was a child, then I loved him, and called my son out of Egypt. As they called them, so they went from them. They sacrificed unto Baalim, and burned incense to graven images. I taught Ephraim also to go, taking them by their arms, but they knew not that I healed them. I drew them with cords of a man, with bands of love, and I was to them as they that take off the yoke off their jaws, and laid meat unto them. He shall not return into the land of Egypt, and the Assyrian shall be his king, because they refuse to return. And the sword shall abide on his cities, and shall consume his branches, and devour them because of their own counsels. And my people are bent to backsliding from me, though they called them to the Most High. None at all would exalt him. How shall I give thee up, Ephraim? How shall I deliver thee, Israel? How shall I make thee as Admah? How shall I set thee as Zeboim? Mine heart is turned within me, my repentings are kindled together. I will not execute the fierceness of my anger. I will not return to destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not man, the Holy One in the midst of thee, and I will not enter into the city. They shall walk after the Lord, he shall roar like a lion. When he shall roar, then the children shall tremble from the west. They shall tremble as a bird out of Egypt, and as a dove out of the land of Assyria, and I will place them in their houses, saith the Lord. Ephraim compasseth me about with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit, but Judah yet ruleth with God, and is faithful with the saints. In this chapter there are a couple of interesting things. It's mainly a list of the complaints that the Lord has against Ephraim, Ephraim being simply the title of the major tribe that was the leader of all of the 10 tribes and standing in for all of the 10 tribes, so he didn't have to list off the name of each of the 10 tribes, since Ephraim was the main character, the main leader, and everybody pretty well followed Ephraim's lead. Just saying Ephraim to a Jew would have meant he would have known he was talking about the whole of the 10 tribes. In the very first verse says, when Israel was a child, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. And that has several possible connotations. It could have been the children of Israel when they came out, when they were children, when the nation was young and formed, when they were called out of Egypt and no longer to be slaves. Or Matthew said this was actually a type, a shadow of the forthcoming event, which was the Savior being called out of Egypt back to Israel when Herod died. Interesting there. Now, in verse 4, we have another very interesting thing, and one you probably wouldn't have thought of if you didn't know. And it says, I drew them with the cords of a man, with bonds of love, and I was to them as they that take off the yoke on their jaws, and I laid meat unto them, meat being grain. Now, this talked about the yoke that the oxen wear. And I said, and I drew them with cords of a man, in other words, man-made cords, rope, okay, with bands of love. And I was to them, in other words, I was to Israel, even though Israel was miserable, idol worshiping, all the rest of them. I was as the people who have oxen that need to work, and they take the yoke off of the oxen, okay, off their jaws, and I put grain out for them. Now, what happens when you have oxen is, especially in the Middle East there, the yoke that they used was very heavy solid wood, acacia wood in some cases, which is very heavy. And it not only, it rests on the neck, and actually at the place where the neck and the shoulders meet, and there's another piece of wood that is bent around so it comes up underneath the bottom part of the neck and holds the yoke from falling off. And then there's some very heavy harness that goes around the mouth and around the head and sort of holds the yoke in place. And this yoke is so heavy that if it slides off of the point where the neck and the shoulders meet, there's so much weight that the ox can't lift his head. So to put his head in the place where the grain and food is for him. And so those people who worked with the animals understood something. If the animal needed to feed, they needed to take the yoke off of the animal, needed to take the harness off of the animal, so the animal could freely eat. And this is sort of a metaphor, an allegory, that basically the Lord loved Israel so much that even though they had work to do, that in order to let them have the freedom to do the things that they really needed to do, he would lift the yoke of oppression off of them. And he would put grain, food out for them. It isn't the ox that made the food for itself. It wasn't the ox that put the yoke on there. The yoke was on there because it needed it to love. It needed it to work. But with bands of love, I drew them with cords of a man, with bands of love. And I was to them as the one who would make their life easier, make it possible for them to do the things they wanted. And even though the Savior and the Lord were going to do all of those things, Israel would still not listen. Would still not listen. They benefited so much and seemed to learn so little.